Tonight, the death toll in the U.S. rising to more than 12,000. In New York, the worst day yet. One person dying every 2 minutes. The Navy hospital ship the Comfort beginning to treat coronavirus patients, but a crew member testing positive. The new warnings why people of color may be especially at risk. And the new side of hope, what New York's governor says is happening in the state's hospitals. Also tonight, the primary in a pandemic. Long lines at the polls in Wisconsin. The state going ahead with the election after a fierce battle over whether to postpone. The dramatic shakeup, the acting Secretary of the Navy resigning after he fired the captain who sounded the alarm about an outbreak on a U.S. warship. Where is the relief? Hundreds of thousands applying for the federal government's small business rescue program. Why have so few gotten money? Our NBC News exclusive, Senator Amy Klobuchar and her husband, their first joint interview since his battle with coronavirus. It all began, they say, with a fever.
I kept saying, it's over 100, like every day. It's still over 100. I think you might have this.
Their new message tonight to families and the race to ramp up the new testing that officials say may be the key to getting Americans back to work.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we are struggling to isolate the hope somewhere inside this horror, but it's hard to get past the numbers like we saw reported in New York State today, recording its highest single-day death toll from COVID-19, 731. But even as this virus kills and sickens in communities across this country, there are slowly emerging signs of encouragement in places that some of what we're doing may be working. Let's turn to our team on the front lines now, starting with Gabe Gutierrez.
With New York hospitals pushed to the brink, the state's coronavirus death toll had its largest single-day spike yet. 731 people died in just 24 hours, one about every 2 minutes.
Behind every one of those numbers is an individual, is a family, is a mother, is a father, is a sister, is a brother.
But there's some encouraging news. Governor Andrew Cuomo is now projecting that New York is reaching a plateau. The average number of hospitalizations is going down.
The 3-day average is down, which is good news.
Still, aerial images from New York City show not everyone is properly social distancing.
We must continue those strategies if we're going to protect lives.
So far, only about 50 patients have been treated on the U.S. naval ship Comfort. A crew member there has just been isolated after testing positive for the virus. Now, one of the largest churches in the world, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in Manhattan, will turn into another field hospital to relieve the pressure on doctors like Nicholas Hernandez at Northwell Plainview Hospital.
We're pretty much putting out fires wherever we can.
Weeks ago, he himself got sick.
You know, I worried about my family. I have an 8-month-old. I had to, be careful with, and tried my best to do everything I could to maintain my distance. But it's still that worry. Am I going to make it through this? Are my symptoms going to get better? Why am I not getting better? It's day 10, it's day 11, it's day 12.
He's now back at work for grueling 90-hour shifts. But over the weekend, his grandfather came into his ICU. He's now on a ventilator.
This virus doesn't discriminate.
For so many on the front lines, it's the battle of their lives.
I felt just defeated, unappreciated.
We first spoke with New York ER doctor Sion Faroux last week. Days later, she started showing symptoms. She's now staying home, frustrated that it was so hard to get a test.
When seeing asymptomatic White House officials and celebrities, animals at the zoo getting tested was very frustrating, anger-inducing, and felt worthless.
Among the lives lost, Raymond Copeland, a New York City sanitation worker. Deputy Chief Inspector Syed Rahman was a 22-year veteran of the New York Fire Department who helped clean up Ground Zero after 9/11. He leaves behind a wife and 4 young sons. Pastor Isaac Graham had led the congregation at Macedonia Baptist Church of Harlem for more than 40 years.
He never, ever let no one forget that his family came first after God. And again, I thank God for his life.
State authorities are hopeful New York may be turning a corner, but for the families losing loved ones tonight, it is no less painful. Lester.
Yeah, Gabe, thank you. There are troubling signs as the virus spreads to other hotspots across the country, with new data suggesting communities of color are hit much harder than others. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
As the coronavirus spreads across big cities and small communities, it took roughly a month for our national death toll to reach 5,000. But in less than 5 days, that number doubled, now surpassing 10,000. It comes amid scenes like these today in Florida. Little social distancing as many wait in line to file for unemployment benefits. In Wisconsin today, a primary election unlike any other.
I haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime.
Thousands of voters battling long lines and masks, trying to stay 6 feet apart after the courts blocked an effort to postpone the election.
They should have prolonged it or pushed it back.
Frustration in Wisconsin comes while Michigan is now experiencing their deadliest days. More than 700 employees at the Henry Ford Health System in Detroit have contracted the virus, the police chief among the nearly 600 officers spending time in quarantine.
I've never seen anything like this. You know, I've been through earthquakes and riots in Los Angeles, so I know what a significant crisis looks like, but not like this.
Though no community is immune from the virus, people of color are facing alarming rates of infection. In Chicago, 68% of the city's deaths involve African Americans, who make up just 30% of the population.
Those numbers take your breath away.
In Louisiana, 70% of those who have died are also African American, though they too comprise roughly 30% of the state's population. Dr. Uche Blackstock is on the front lines of the fight.
COVID-19 is the perfect storm for our Black and Brown communities, which are mostly low income. You know, they're going to be the most affected due to lack of access to testing. Many of them still working on the front lines as essential workers or service workers.
Tonight, several states have not issued stay-at-home orders, even as new infections and deaths mount. In Seattle, we are getting an exclusive look inside the University of Washington's COVID unit, where the most serious cases get critical treatment.
We just cannot take our foot off the gas at this point. We need all the capacity that we can manage to be able to care for a potential second wave of COVID patients.
In states like Washington and California, where social distancing measures were ordered early, the Surgeon General says the infection curve there has flattened. But hospitals across the country are still bracing for patients like Paul Logan, the Indiana high school athletic director who has been on a ventilator for 6 days.
They don't know what's going to happen next. Like, they're just as blind in that field as we are. And so they do say prepare for the worst, but they hope for the best.
But even amid all the heartbreak, there are heartwarming stories of survival. A tearful send-off for Christina Paz, a mother of 5 who left the ICU and got to hug her husband today for the first time in 2 weeks.
Tonight here in California, the governor says there may be no sense of normalcy anytime soon, saying social distancing could be extended in this state into June. Lester?
All right, Miguel, thanks very much. And now to the stunning shakeup. The acting Navy secretary out after he harshly criticized the fired captain who made a desperate plea for help after the coronavirus outbreak on his ship. Kristen Welker is at the White House.
Tonight, a dramatic twist. Acting Navy Secretary Thomas Modly has resigned after setting off a firestorm with a profanity-laced address Monday, attacking the captain he ousted, Brett Crozier, in remarks to the crew of Crozier's former ship, the USS Roosevelt. Modly dismissed Crozier last week after Crozier wrote a letter that leaked to the press sounding the alarm about an outbreak of coronavirus on his ship and pleading for help. On a recording obtained by NBC News, Modly accused Crozier of a betrayal of trust.
If he didn't think that information was going to get out into the public, then he was A, too naive or too stupid to be the commanding officer of a ship like this.
Some of the sailors with a strong reaction of their own. Crozier, who has now tested positive for COVID-19 himself, was given a hero's farewell when he departed.
Captain Crozier!
President Trump reacting late today.
He didn't have to resign, but he felt it would be better for the country.
It all comes as the president's entire response to the coronavirus is under new scrutiny amid revelations one of his closest advisors, Peter Navarro, warned the White House on January 29th in a memo obtained by the New York Times and not confirmed by NBC News. The coronavirus could cost the United States trillions of dollars and millions of lives, warning of a lack of preparation that, quote, elevates the risk of the coronavirus evolving into a full-blown pandemic, imperiling the lives of millions of Americans. Around the same time, the president repeatedly downplayed the threat.
I mean, view this the same as the flu. We're in great shape, though.
But now he repeatedly says this.
Nobody could have predicted something like this.
Tonight, Mr. Trump responding.
But I heard he wrote some memos talking about pandemic. I didn't see him. I didn't look for him either. But that was about the same time as I felt that we should do it. That was about the same time that I closed it down.
Now, that is a reference to the travel restrictions against China. Meanwhile, the president has replaced the acting Pentagon inspector general from overseeing the government's handling of that $2 trillion stimulus package. Top Democrats condemned the move, calling it corrupt. Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker at the White House, thanks. And for millions of small business owners, the frustration and fear are only growing as they try to navigate the federal loan process and wait for the money to arrive, money they desperately need. With more on that, here's Stephanie Rule.
The clock is ticking for small business owners.
As each day goes by, we worry more and more.
Days of frustration and confusion.
Every bank is on a different page.
After the chaotic rollout of the government's $350 billion Paycheck Protection Program, despite continued reassurances from the Treasury Department.
You get the money, you'll get it the same day. If you don't get the loan this week, there'll be plenty of money for you next week.
Of the 4 biggest banks, 3 received loan applications for more than $90 billion. But so far, they've distributed little to no money. Wells Fargo stopped accepting applications 48 hours after it started. And as of today, Citibank's online application process hadn't yet gone live. The Treasury Department says $75 billion in guaranteed loans were processed, some through community banks. But it's unclear how much has gotten into the hands of business owners like Wendy Bourne.
50% of restaurants might not even make it. I might not make it.
Bourne closed her 3 Metropolitan Bakery locations in Philadelphia.
We need the PPP to enable us to resume operations, rehire our staffs, pay our bills. It's extremely urgent.
After a week of gathering documents, Bourne was finally able to submit her application. She's been waiting 4 days to hear if she's been approved. Alex Perry, who owns a commercial sign company, has been waiting even longer.
We're down about 80%.
Perry applied through a community bank in Illinois and can't get an update on its status.
All the lenders and all of our vendors are playing nice right now. We're all in this together. But I worry what's going to happen 4 to 6 weeks when their bills come due.
Lester, today the president said he wants Congress to come up with an additional $250 billion for the program and wants the Senate to vote on it as early as Thursday.
All right, Stephanie, thank you. Please join me for a special hour-long report on the pandemic. We'll answer your questions tonight at 10 Eastern on NBC and MSNBC. And we'll be back here in 60 seconds with the first images of life resuming after the lockdown at the original epicenter of all this and the new test that may hold the key to getting people back to work in this country. As the coronavirus spreads in the U.S., China today lifted the lockdown in Wuhan, where the virus first emerged, while in the U.K., Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains in the ICU. NBC's Richard Engel reports.
Where it all began, in Wuhan, China. Today, the government lifted its quarantines after more than 10 weeks of complete lockdown. I haven't had noodles for 2 months, said this woman. They taste even better. But authorities closely track residents using an app. Although there are accusations China has been fudging the numbers, it reported for the first time no new virus deaths. Hardly so in Europe, where thousands are dying every day, with no one exempt from infection. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains in an ICU. Downing Street saying he's stable, in good spirits, breathing on his own. Johnson has handed over control to his foreign secretary. The government says whenever necessary.
I can reassure the Prime Minister, and we can reassure the public,
that his team will not blink and we will not flinch from the task at hand at this crucial moment.
I spoke to Johnson's former press secretary.
He's guided in many ways by what he used to do on the rugby field. No matter how hard you are hit, you dust yourself off, you catch a breath, you get on your feet, and you get on with the task.
Johnson is spending another night in the ICU here as the UK recorded its highest daily death toll so far, around 800. And experts say the peak has yet to come. Lester?
All right. Richard Engel in London tonight. Thanks. And back home, a major push to speed up testing for coronavirus antibodies. Tom Costello now on why it could be the key to getting Americans back to work.
It could be a game changer to protect frontline paramedics, doctors, and nurses, and maybe reopen the economy. A simple finger prick blood test to determine whether someone has already been exposed to the coronavirus with or without symptoms, recovered, and now has the antibodies.
That would mean that you're no longer contagious and you can't catch the virus because you have the antibodies in your system, which means you can get to work, you can go back to school, you can do whatever you want.
Already, New York State is ramping up production of the test kits. Similar efforts underway at Stanford University and North Carolina. The results available in minutes.
And we're hoping that that will ultimately give more insights for the health departments of how it's being spread and what the true presence of COVID-19 is in the population.
The FDA has given emergency approval for a test with widespread testing as soon as May.
We can test people to see if they've been exposed, immune, and go back to work. And a combination of that kind of test with the current kind of test we have now is how America opens back up.
But testing isn't always successful. The UK ordered 4 million antibody test kits and found them to be unreliable. Germany is considering issuing work permits to people who test positive for the antibodies, but that could be months away. Importantly, the antibody test is not the same as the test to determine if you currently have the virus.
But as we're working on the crisis of today, we're looking to the future to ensure we have the systems in place to bring those early alert systems together while we work on the antibody testing.
Most researchers agree with Governor Cuomo that it's unlikely you'd get the virus again if you have the antibodies, though they need hard science to prove that. Lester?
All right, Tom, thank you very much. Coming up, Senator Amy Klobuchar and her husband's urgent message following his coronavirus battle. All right, we're back now with Senator Amy Klobuchar and her husband, John Bessler, speaking out exclusively to our Stephanie Gosk following his coronavirus fight.
For Senator Amy Klobuchar and her husband, 2020 started off crisscrossing the country. But days after she dropped out of the presidential race, the couple would be facing a very different kind of challenge, coronavirus.
It just suddenly hit me. I had a fever. And that fever just lasted for days and days.
And I kept saying, it's over 100, like every day. It's still over 100. I think you might have this.
Senator, you don't strike me as an alarmist, having watched you on the campaign trail. But was there a point when you started to get nervous?
Yeah, well, when he seemed not always attuned to what that temperature was and that it was so high, when he started coughing up blood, when you detected the shortness of breath, in our phone conversations.
John had to go to the hospital for 5 days, relying on supplemental oxygen.
It's so hard, and he ended up taking a turn for the better. So many people take a turn for the worse, and you can't be there. You can't hold their hand. You can't give a hug to the health workers.
John, you're 52 years old. You had no underlying health conditions. You're the person this is not supposed to affect like this, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is not a cold. You don't get pneumonia when you get a cold, and you don't end up at the hospital on oxygen when you get a cold. This is really a serious thing.
Now he plans to donate plasma.
As I still have some pneumonia from the coronavirus, so I'm still dealing with that. But as soon as I get over that, I'm going to be donating some blood.
But he's not contagious anymore.
No.
At least that's what the doctors say.
Tonight, the family is back together. Their daughter made them spaghetti.
We can send him out to the grocery store now. That's his job.
Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, New York.
A battle so many are fighting. Up next for us, the new portrait of American families on the front porch. Finally, let us show you the new twist on the family photo. Here's Kevin Tibbles.
Portraits of families together in a pandemic.
Hopefully they're going to remember this time as the day they could take a picture together because something bad happened. So that's the good thing out of this. Okay, you ready?
Jackie Bravo Visser is one of many photographers, snapping parents, kids, and pets from the safe confines of their porch, often stopping on walks to shoot folks in Chicago she's never met, free of charge.
It's a gift, really.
Like Fran, Izzy, and Eric Abramovitz.
Kindness and hope, and that we're going to be okay.
Chris Villa was supposed to be on vacation in Florida. So what does the photo do for you?
It just brings back a memory that we were doing the best that we could in these times. Ready?
Keepsakes of when we all made the best of it.
1, 2, 3, cheers!
Kevin Tibbles, NBC News, Chicago.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We want to start with some promising news tonight. The federal government says it has made lots of progress on getting much needed personal protection equipment for frontline workers. And the strategy is very much made in Canada. Nearly 5,000 companies, we're told, across the country have offered to retool to make medical supplies. An auto parts company, for example, is using airbag material to make hospital gowns. Other companies have struck a deal to make up to 30,000 ventilators. It's all part of Ottawa's plan to buy, and build until the medical system has what it needs.
We have told these companies across the country who've put up their hands to go ahead and get building ventilators as quickly as possible and as many as possible in case we need them in Canada. We certainly hope that we won't be needing all those ventilators.
The government is buying supplies from overseas, too. Gloves, gowns, and masks in a market that's described as like the Wild West. Countries are all competing for the same dwindling pool of products. So far, the federal government says it's sourced more than 230 million surgical masks. Over 16 million, it says, have already been delivered. In our top story tonight, Mike LeCouture looks at the Canadian companies that have taken up the call to help.
It was a lifesaver in the 2003 SARS outbreak, and an updated version of the Winnipeg ventilator could help thousands of Canadians survive COVID-19. The Canadian-made ventilator is being retooled by a cluster of companies, including Starfish Medical, that hope to accomplish the Herculean effort of making thousands of these in a short time frame.
Normally something like this would take 2 or 3 years, and we're compressing it into weeks to months. We were hoping that we'll get through all of our clinical testing that we need to do and regulatory during May, and then we'll be manufacturing as soon as we can.
At the same time, the Prime Minister has tapped Nobel Prize winner Dr. Art MacDonald to fast-track his easy-to-make ventilator, which will be tested in Italy.
We hope to get full medical certification there. We've been working closely with the FDA in the U.S. and Health Canada. We expect to be able to produce these objects starting in a few weeks' time.
The federal government has ordered 30,000 ventilators, even though Canada may not need that many. But if we don't, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says they won't go to waste.
And we will have ventilators to share with other countries that are facing more difficult circumstances. For us, doing more right now, doing quicker right now, is really the only option.
Manufacturers like Canada Goose and Stanfields are now retooling their operations to make medical gowns for frontline healthcare workers. The government is also in talks with nearly 5,000 Canadian companies to make personal protective equipment, so we don't have to rely on buying it from other countries because supplies are so scarce.
Ordering, of course, does not guarantee a delivery.
The lack of PPEs has frontline workers worried will run out, and the nurses' union is appealing to citizens who are now wearing masks.
You see somebody from the public wearing a surgical or an N95. They don't belong on the street, they belong in our healthcare system.
Now, there's a huge rush to get all of this equipment, but faster isn't always better. The City of Toronto had to recall about $200,000 worth of surgical masks, citing poor quality. And those masks were sent to long-term care homes where the need is even more acute. Donna?
All right, Mike LeCouture in Ottawa, thanks. The Premier of Alberta says his province is facing a triple threat: COVID-19 and the collapse of the economy and of energy prices. Jason Kenney released 2 disease models tonight. He said the probable scenario is that infections will peak in mid-May and that there would be between 400 and 3,100 deaths in Alberta. And this, he says, is the elevated scenario.
Under the most serious but less likely elevated scenario, we would see infections peak at the beginning of May with as many as 1 million infections and between 500 and 6,600 deaths. But these models are not a done deal. I want Albertans instead to see them as a challenge, perhaps the greatest challenge of our generation.
Premier Kenney says restrictions like physical distancing will not be relaxed until the end of May, and he plans to ramp up an aggressive system of mass testing and do as many as 20,000 tests a day. Here are the number of cases in Canada right now. More than 17,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19. More than 1,200 new cases were reported today. Ontario and Quebec had the biggest daily increase in new cases. Ontario confirmed 379 more cases. Quebec reported 760 more people tested positive. But in BC, there were only 25 new lab-confirmed cases. That's the lowest daily increase that province has reported in weeks. And some breaking news from Ottawa tonight. The Deputy Minister of Global Affairs, Marta Morgan, has tested positive for COVID-19. The government says her symptoms are mild, and she is now self-isolating. The numbers across Canada don't affect the whole story, of course, because testing is still limited in Canada. And it's still too early to be certain of anything. But there are signs the overall curve in Canada is showing signs of flattening, especially in BC. One of the biggest concerns everywhere are outbreaks in long-term care facilities. There are at least 51 outbreaks in homes in Ontario alone. Eric Sorensen is analyzing the data gained for us tonight.
Unquestionably, Quebec has been the hardest hit province. Now, a long-term care facility in Laval may have one of the worst COVID-19 outbreaks in the country. 105 residents have tested positive. 8 have died. As of today, in Quebec, 150 have died from the coronavirus. The province is projecting the number could be over 1,200 by the end of April. In a worst-case scenario, more than 8,800. But officials do say Quebec is on course to handle the outbreak so far. The Premier says this is a critical week to contain the spread.
There must be no gatherings, including for religious celebrations such as Easter.
Sound advice for the nation. As hard hit as Quebec is, the Premier says the province is heading in the right direction.
We're making progress in our battle against the virus.
And so is the country making progress.
The number of COVID-19 cases in Canada continues to rise, but there has been an improvement in the daily numbers. After a sharp rise to over 1,200 cases on one day last week, the numbers began to flatten out a little bit. In fact, there were fewer than 1,200 yesterday. British Columbia stands out, no longer a sharp rise in the total numbers. And look at the daily cases. For 1 week last week, BC had an average of 71 new cases per day. But this past week, just 42 new cases per day, a distinct downward trend.
All of Canada is ahead of early infection forecasts.
Typically, this virus is doubling every few days, and we've definitely seen a slowdown in that. We're still seeing increases in cases, but they're not increasing nearly as fast.
What happened? A dramatic change in behavior everywhere. Google geolocated the movement of Canadians last month. Public transit hubs, usage down 2/3. A plunge in retail, shopping, restaurants, movies, many just closed up. A big drop in going to our usual workplaces, instead working from home. Even grocery and pharmacy, Canadians are going, but less often. A steady falling off in visiting parks as we keep our distance. And the one upturn, of course, residential, as we spend more time at home.
Because we saw people come together March 31st and stay at home, we should start to see the effects of that now in the second half of April.
Grim mortality numbers still lie ahead for this country, but by all indications, the main approach, staying away from other people, appears to have been the right strategy, if we can keep it up. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
You're looking at a virtual reality image of a coronavirus patient at George Washington Hospital in Washington, D.C. The patient is a generally healthy 59-year-old man with high blood pressure. Just days before this image was created, he was asymptomatic. But now, those green areas show where the infection has damaged tissue in the lungs. For many, COVID-19 will be mild, but for others, it's deadly. This video is about the latter path, how the virus kills. We'll start in China. 191 confirmed COVID-19 patients were in a hospital in Wuhan. 54 died. Of those 54, 50 had a condition known as ARDS. Acute respiratory distress syndrome is a condition that stops oxygen from reaching the organs.
You have air hunger. It means that they can't breathe.
There's a very strong correlation between the people who develop ARDS and the people who die.
ARDS is not unique to COVID-19.
It's such a long list of causes. Infection, people with HIV/AIDS, if you get into a big motor vehicle accident and sustain multiple injuries to multiple organs, that causes ARDS. SARS and MERS. Now, things that you inhale and that can be toxic can cause ARDS. Household bleach, war gases, mustard gas and phosgene. So the people who vaped THC that was contaminated with vitamin E acetate, and those patients were also developing ARDS.
Here's what's actually happening when you get ARDS. When we breathe in air, oxygen goes down our windpipe and fills the lungs. Specifically, the small air sacs at the end of the lungs are the key to air exchange in the body.
So that's why nature has created, or evolution has created this the barrier is so thin, it's just a few micrometers in size. So the oxygen has to go through just a little bit of collagen, the cell that lines the alveolus, into the red blood cell. Once it gets into the red blood cell, then the blood takes it, back into the heart and from there to the rest of the body.
And this is the key to understanding why COVID-19 is killing people.
That entire wall of the air sac gets damaged by the virus. Think of it like a thick layer of paint on the inside of the walls of a room, or a thick layer of mold on the walls on the inside of the room. That's what it looks like.
As that wall becomes thicker, oxygen can no longer pass into the bloodstream, and your organs begin to suffocate. So if you are sick, you might be asking yourself, am I on the mild path or the serious path? A good indication is whether you have severe shortness of breath and for how long. Those are indications the virus has progressed lower into the lungs. One small study of hospitalized patients in China found that 0 to 2 days after development of symptoms, chest scans were coming back normal for more than half of patients. Keep in mind, these are patients that were sick enough to be in the hospital. But within 3 to 5 days after symptoms started, that flipped, and 91% of hospitalized patients had significant respiratory issues.
As you progress beyond that 7 to 10 day stage, that's when ARDS seems to be developing. And once it develops rapidly fast compared to ARDS developing from, let's say, another cause. And these patients seem to be doing much worse over a relatively faster period of time.
Many people have mild or even no symptoms with the virus, but the longer COVID-19 affects your lungs, the higher the risk of serious respiratory issues.
And the longer you're on a ventilator, the less likelihood you will come off the ventilator. That is the blunt truth of this situation.
When I saw this on our first patient, and you see the extent of the damage and how it affects both lungs and various parts of the lungs. And it's much more striking, even for somebody who's been in practice for almost 20 years.
And that's what happened to this patient.
Just about 1 week after being at our hospital, unfortunately, he passed away. Really, my goal of trying to get this out into the public is so that they understand the severity of the problem that we're seeing and why the social distancing and the flatten the curve and every other hashtag that's come up in the past couple weeks is just so important, is because this is a community-wide problem. It's a global problem, and it's going to take a community solution. right? Everybody has a role to play. And if you're not in the healthcare field right now, your role is to stay home, right? Because again, the virus doesn't move on its own. People move. People transmit the virus.
And the longer you're on a ventilator, the less likelihood you will come off the ventilator.
Why do no grocery stores have powdered sugar anymore? I get toilet paper hoarding, but powdered sugar? Come on, people. Vice President Mike Pence has spent some decent chunk of the past 3+ years defending Donald Trump's indefensible statements. What the president meant and what the president was getting at are key phrases of the Pence vocabulary. See, Trump isn't really bullying and boorish. He's frank and a straight shooter or something. Now, Pence does this for a simple reason. He would like to be president, and being on Trump's good side is the only way that happens. And the only way to consistently stay on Trump's good side is to relentlessly defend him from any and all criticism. It's basically math. Which brings me to Pence's most recent defense of Trump over, yes, you guessed it, the coronavirus. So in an interview with CNN's Wolf Blitzer in late March, Pence sought to defend Trump's past statements downplaying the coronavirus, suggesting that the president was simply projecting hope and optimism, and at no time had Trump, in Pence's word, belittled the virus. Watch this.
I don't believe the president has ever belittled the threat of the coronavirus.
Yeah. As a favor to Mike Pence, this is a public service to all of you, I decided it might be worth taking a stroll down memory lane of all the times Donald Trump literally belittled the coronavirus and the threat it posed to America over these past few months. Step into my time machine, won't you? It's just behind that door. Trust me, it's entirely safe. Won't hurt a bit. Number one.
We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine.
That's Trump way back on January 22nd, the first time he was asked publicly about the coronavirus. It was in a sit-down with CNBC's Joe Kernan at, of all places, the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Now, what's amazing about the interview is not just Trump downplaying the virus as a threat, but also how, when questioned by Kernan about whether China was being transparent enough about the coronavirus, Trump replied like this, quote, I do. I have great relationship with President Xi. We just signed probably the biggest deal ever made. By late March, Trump had totally reversed course on China, insisting the country was to blame for making the virus worse in the United States due to a fundamental lack of transparency. Number two.
We pretty much shut it down coming in from China.
Okay, so this one came in the start of February in an interview between Donald Trump and Fox News' Sean Hannity. Trump then and now was touting his decision to close down travel from China as effectively stopping the virus cold. A little over 2 months after this interview, coronavirus had sickened more than 337,000 Americans and killed more than 9,600. Number three, the coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. We are in contact with everyone in all relevant countries. CDC and World Health have been working hard and very smart. Stock market starting to look very good to me. This Trump tweet came on February 24th. On that day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed just under 29,000. Exactly 1 month later, it closed under 21,000. It has since rebounded somewhat to around 22,000. Number four.
We're going down, not up. We have it so well under control. I mean, we really have done a very good job.
Trump said this on February 26th at the Coronavirus Task Force Daily Press Briefing. At that point, there were 60 confirmed coronavirus cases in the U.S., the vast majority of which, 42, were passengers aboard the Diamond Princess, you remember that ship. Now, since that time, the number of corona cases in America has increased roughly 5,000-fold. Number five.
It's a little like the regular flu that we have flu shots for. And we'll essentially have a flu shot for this in a fairly quick manner.
So Trump spent much of February and even well into March drawing the flu comparison as a way to suggest the media was overreacting to the threat coronavirus posed. This has never been true for lots and lots of reasons. Let's go through them. Coronavirus is more easily transmissible than the flu. It's more deadly than the flu. We have no vaccine or shot for coronavirus like we do the flu. And because coronavirus is a new disease to humans, we also lack any sort of herd immunity like we have from the flu. Number six.
Going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear. And from our shores, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows.
So that was Trump on February 27th. 2-ish weeks later, March 16th, he issued guidance that there should be no gatherings of 10 or more people and that people needed to practice social distancing. He extended all of those guidelines on April 1st through the end of this month. Number 7, no, I'm not concerned at all. No, I'm not. No, we've done a great job. This was Trump's response on March 8th when asked whether he was concerned that the virus was getting closer to Washington, D.C., and in particular, the White House. It was part of a press availability with Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro at Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Now, 4 days after Trump said this, a Bolsonaro press aide who had been with both presidents at Mar-a-Lago tested positive for coronavirus. Number 8. So last year, 37,000 Americans died from the common flu. It averages between 27,000 and 70,000 per year. Nothing is shut down, life and the economy go on. At this moment, there are 546 confirmed cases of coronavirus with 22 deaths. Think about that! This tweet from Trump on March 9th is, for my money, his worst statement on coronavirus. All of the flu comparisons are wrong for all of the reasons I noted above. A week after he sent this tweet, the White House issued guidelines urging Americans to avoid coming within 6 feet of each other. 2 weeks after he sent this tweet, the Dow Jones dropped under 19,000. Think about that! Number 9.
It's a very contagious virus. It's incredible, but it's something that we have tremendous control of.
Trump said that on March 15th, when roughly 6 people in the United States had died from coronavirus. Despite having the virus under tremendous control, deaths have risen by 16,000% since Trump made that remark. Number 10.
I don't believe you need 40,000 or 30,000 ventilators. You know, you go into major hospitals sometimes, they'll have 2 ventilators, and now all of a sudden they're saying, can we order 30,000 ventilators?
This one comes from another Hannity-Trump interview, this one on March 27th, and it features the President of the United States suggesting that governors and hospitals in hard-hit areas like New York are purposely exaggerating their medical needs to keep coronavirus patients alive. Yeah. Last but not least, number 11.
You can call it germ, you can call it a flu, you can call it a virus. You know, you can call it many different names. I'm not sure anybody even knows what it is.
Infectious disease experts know exactly what coronavirus is, and it's not the flu. Here's how the Centers for Disease Control defines it. Quote, COVID-19 is caused by a coronavirus, end quote. Simple. So let's be honest here, Mike Pence. By saying that the president has never belittled the threat or consequences of coronavirus, you, sir, are belittling the word belittled. And that is the point. We make new Point episodes from my house every Tuesday and Thursday. We are also doing political trivia every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from my Instagram account. Follow that at SalizaC. And in the meantime, stay home and please stay safe.